This is Big Podcast.
It's Build a Big Podcast, the marketing podcast for podcasters. I'm David Hooper. I've got a site at bigpodcast.com. On that site, there's a newsletter available. It goes out every Friday morning. It's called Big Podcast Insider. The purpose of this newsletter is to help you make more money with your podcast. It is to help you build a bigger audience. It is to help you have more impact, make people care about your podcast. It is the same purpose as this podcast. And on this episode, I'm putting those two things together. I've started to do an audio version of that newsletter with some bonus material. If you're interested in what I'm talking about, don't miss the newsletter. Go to newsletter.bigpodcast.com. You will be able to see all the links that I'm talking about. There's more to what I'm saying at that site, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. The first element of every issue, it's what I call a prologue. This is me writing about what the newsletter is about and some thoughts I've got on podcasting for the week. And in this issue, I talk about the media and how much we have to learn from the media, meaning old school media, broadcast radio, television, cable television even, newspapers, anything like that. They've got a lot to teach us. I did a series of articles on my blog. Again, everything is at bigpodcast.com. I went to old school radio guys and I asked them, what can we learn as podcasters from broadcast radio? So if you want the links to those, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. But let me give you some examples, not only from traditional media, but also online media. You may have heard of a newsletter called Morning Brew. That newsletter has 3,500,000 subscribers. How do they do it? One of the ways they're doing it is direct referrals from readers to readers. You might call that word of mouth. And they encourage this by acknowledging those readers. They gamify it. Maybe you can win a Morning Brew mug, something like that. It doesn't take much to encourage people to share what you are doing. Sometimes all you have to do is let them know. That's why if you go to redpodcast.com, my marketing podcast for experts, it's the sister podcast to this one, except it talks about a little bit more than just podcasting. At the very end of every one of the episode notes, I will say, if you found this episode helpful, if you like this podcast, I would appreciate you telling a friend, maybe even two. And that call to action is huge. It sounds obvious, but what it's going to do is double the referrals you get because people think, okay, well, I could tell this one guy that I've got in mind, but it gets them thinking, wait a minute, I've got this other lady. She'd be perfect for it too. Not everybody is going to talk about your podcast to another person. They're not going to share it. They're in their own world. You want to encourage the people who do to do that more often. It's easier for you to do that than to convince everybody to share it with one person. Don't get greedy. Don't make it like work. Don't say, hey, tell 10 people, tell 20 people. I've seen people do that. I've seen people do that with book launches. Hey, don't just buy a book for yourself. Buy it for all your friends. Buy one for the car. Buy one to put on your office bookshelf. That sounds like work, and people are going to shut down at that point. They're going to say, this guy's greedy. This guy's greedy. But it's easy to go from 1 to 2. Again, doubling the output, the results, the referrals, whatever it is that you're looking for. Morning Brew gamifies that. That's something you can bring to your podcast right now on the next episode. Write this down. On the next episode, when I end this, at the very end of the episode notes as well, I'm going to tell people, don't just tell one person about this, tell 2 people. And while I'm at it, if you like this podcast, Build a Big Podcast, you got a friend, maybe even 2, tell them about me. Bigpodcast.com is where to find me. The next thing I talk about are teasers. This is another thing that we can learn from traditional media. Now, we do this on broadcast radio. The broadcast radio show that I've got, Music Business Radio, I finish up an interview. Once we're done, I've still got the guest in the session. Say, all right, we're going to do a teaser. This is an advertisement that lets people know what to expect on the show this week. You can do the exact same thing. Put that teaser on your social media, put it on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. And here's the formula. Hey, it's David Hooper. On this episode, I'm going to interview blank, my guest name. He's an expert on blank, whatever he's an expert on. Then what I'll do is I'll throw it over to the guest and I'll say, John, what are we going to talk about? Well, David, we're going to talk about 1, 2, and 3. He's going to say it just like that. We're going to talk about, and then he's going to list 3 things that we just talked about. Let me give you that teaser formula again. I'm going to give it to you again. The whole thing, it's about 20, 30 seconds. Hey, it's David Hooper with Build a Big Podcast, the marketing podcast for podcasters. If you want to grow your podcast, if you want to make a difference with the podcast that you've got, you're not going to want to miss this episode with blank. He is an expert on blank. John, what are we going to talk about? Well, David, thanks very much. We're going to talk about 1, 2, and 3. It's a simple formula, 20, 30 seconds. Chop it up, make it sound nice, put some kind of effects at the beginning of it, at the end of it, whatever it is that you do. Attach it to a video, put it on your Instagram, put it on your Facebook, put it on your Twitter. You will get more downloads, more listeners, more engagement from that episode. It's also something that your guests can share because you're making that guest look really cool too. You got a cool looking video. It's like, hey, it's David with Build a Big Podcast, the marketing podcast for podcasters. You're introducing your guest as the expert. People want to be known as experts. They want to be known as celebrities. You're putting that guest on a pedestal. Guests love that, and they're going to share that because of it. By the way, if you want some examples of this, go to the Big Podcast Instagram page. The username, Big Podcast, one word, the numeral 1. Big Podcast 1. All these links, I've got them at bigpodcast.com. But for that Instagram page, Big Podcast 1 is the username. The next traditional media outlet that you want to steal something from? Magazines. Print magazines. They still exist. And the dirty little secret among magazines is that many of their subscribers are not paying for them. I have magazines that, because I'm in the industries that I am in, mainly broadcasting, music industry, entertainment, I have magazines that I have lifetime subscriptions for. I have been getting them for 15 or 20 years. They come every week, every other week, every 4 weeks, every month. They send me every issue that they do because they need to get their subscription numbers up and keep them up. Why would they do that? Because those subscription numbers are how they calculate their advertising rates. Those subscription numbers are what makes them impactful. Some of these magazines do these free subscriptions for publicity. I'm not on this list, but Hustler Magazine, the Larry Flint organization, they send a free, we should also mention, also uninvited copy of every Hustler magazine that comes out to all members of the United States Congress. Ted Cruz, Marsha Blackburn, AOC, they are all getting them. And they've been doing this since the mid-70s. How much publicity has he gotten from that? It's something he can talk about. It's something that he is known for. It puts Larry Flint, or Hustler Magazine, now that Larry Flint is dead, it puts that company in the position of being the anti-establishment. You can do the same thing. If you've got a social justice podcast, for example, I know guys that are looking to make impact. They will take a transcript of their podcasts. They will print them out. They will send them to prisoners. That's a talking point. That shows that you're making impact. That's something that you can sell to advertisers. So consider that with your podcast, whatever your variation of that is. Maybe it's Congress, maybe it's prisoners, maybe it's somebody else. But make that podcast available, then get out and talk about it. That is what makes you interesting. That's what's going to make you interesting to advertisers. That's what's going to make you interesting to the people who listen. They make movies about people like Larry Flint. And as a side note, the producer from our radio show, Music Business Radio, he's actually an actor in that movie. You want to be that kind of person, the kind of person that people make movies about. Maybe not that flashy. Maybe you're not in the same business, but the person that's interesting, that people talk about, that has that kind of impact. I'm going to talk about more examples of things that you can borrow from traditional media as we go on talking about this issue of Big Podcast Insider. Again, get the print version. Get it emailed to you every week. Newsletter.bigpodcast.com. You will see the current edition. You will see every other edition that I do. It's there every week. Every Friday in your mailbox if you want it. This right here is just a supplement. You really want both. So go to newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Get that. And while you were there, make sure you subscribe to this podcast, bigpodcast.com/subscribe. I've got it all there at bigpodcast.com. You'll never miss an issue of the newsletter. You'll never miss an episode of the podcast. This is big news. Spotify and Delta Airlines have an in-flight partnership. This is a literally captive audience. You have somebody who is stuck in a metal tube going at 400, 500 miles an hour listening to your podcast. I remember when I was a kid, my parents donated money to public television. And if you've ever watched public television, they do these fund drives. NPR is the same way. And they say, give money and we will enter you into a contest. Or give money, we'll give you a free umbrella or a free tote bag or whatever they're giving away. Well, they entered them into a contest for a trip to Hawaii. And my parents won. I was not included in that trip. Not in the free trip anyway. But my parents said, all right, you want to go to Hawaii? Let's do this thing. They took me, my sister, had a friend of mine go with me. So it's my parents, 3 kids, and me and my buddy Steven. We're on this jumbo jet over the Pacific Ocean, captive audience, listening to in-flight programming. I still remember the songs that we listened to. This was 1983. I'm going to give you a couple of them. One of them, the Devo song, the theme from Dr. Detroit. The second one, Don't Let It In by Styx. I still remember it. That's what a captive audience looks like. And that is what Spotify is doing with the in-flight entertainment from Delta Airlines. A limited number of podcasts are available. A limited number of music playlists are available. And those limited choices work if you're one of those limited choices. You're probably not going to be one of those limited choices with Spotify. But let me give you an example of how this can work for you. Let's say you've got a podcast on yoga. And assuming you've actually got a good podcast, one that's worth listening to, you could partner up with an established yoga entity. For example, an organization such as Yoga Alliance. You could work a deal to get access to that audience. Maybe it's a sponsorship deal where you're giving them free advertising. Maybe it's a branding deal where you say, this is blank podcast brought to you by Yoga Alliance or the official podcast of Yoga Alliance. I've done these kind of deals. You can go find a company that maybe has limited resources or they don't know what they're doing. And you can say, I will do a podcast for you. We will make it the official podcast. I will work with you to produce this podcast. You fund it by going out and finding the people who want to have access to that audience. You can make that audience bigger by going to an instant and already established audience, such as the audience of Yoga Alliance. You've got to put that in the deal that they will go out and help you get people to that podcast. It doesn't matter how you do the deal. My point is you make yourself the only option to listen to. If I'm a member of Yoga Alliance and they send me an email and they say, we have an official Yoga Alliance podcast on yoga, I'm going to listen to that. And you can work with an organization like that, not only for the audience, by the way, but you can work with them to get access to people that you would not normally be able to get access to. You're a guy in Chunky, Mississippi doing a podcast for Yoga Alliance. Let's just scratch off that Chunky, Mississippi part. You're the guy doing a podcast for Yoga Alliance. So you go to these big companies, they are going to pay attention to you because they want the same thing you do. They want to get access to that audience. That's how you build something like that. You can bet that Delta Airlines and Spotify came together with something like this. Spotify wants more customers. They want more listeners for their premium content. Delta has that built-in audience. Delta needs something to keep their customers, the people stuck in that metal tube, keep them happy. By the way, if you want my help making that happen, happy to do it. Let me give you a URL that's the best way to work with me. Go to bigpodcast.com/blueprint, bigpodcast.com/blueprint. I don't talk about this here, but I do have some training available in a group of pro podcasters, guys that are working just as hard as you are. And if you want to be a part of that, bigpodcast.com/blueprint, that has more information. Next item, ungating our content, how it increased downloads by 102%. That's over double the downloads. In the last issue of the newsletter, I talked about the value of free, giving things away. I also talked about the downside of free. It's something you've got to balance. There's two sides of the coin here. You've got to balance it. And on either of those sides, I see a mistake. One, people give too much away. The second thing, people don't give enough away. They start charging way before they should have. Here's the bottom line. There's value in having a big audience. I talked about giving subscription magazines away. That's why there's value in a big audience. Let me give you another example, a tech example. You probably use Microsoft Word. I do. And why do I use it? Because everybody else uses it. When I'm working with an editor on a book project, they do not use Google Docs. I'm writing my new book on Google Docs, but I got to have a copy of Microsoft Word for when it goes to editing, because the editing is so much more powerful than what Google has come up with. It is the standard. This is why if you've got a bootleg copy of Microsoft Word, Microsoft knows it, but they're still going to update your copy. They're still going to update the other software that they do. Windows, they're not going to leave you hanging even though you haven't paid for Windows. They're going to update it because they want those security patches fixed, for one, but they also want you using their stuff. So when people say, oh, what do you use? I use Microsoft Word. Oh, okay. Well, I'll go buy a copy. You're doing their marketing for them. I want you to think about that for your podcast. If you are giving stuff away and you're kind of resentful of it, you're wondering why people aren't upgrading to your paid stuff, don't worry about that. They're helping you by talking about you. They're helping you by consuming your stuff. They're helping you by doing marketing for you. They're not taking advantage of what you were doing. The worst thing that can happen to somebody like you or somebody like me is that we throw something out to the world and it gets ignored. I don't mind people stealing my stuff. I don't mind people getting this podcast for free. I don't mind people getting the newsletter for free. I don't mind if you buy my book used and I don't get paid on it. When I see a used copy of my book in the bookstore, I love it. It's better than it being on a shelf and not getting read. It's better than it being in a landfill. I want this information out there. And I'd encourage you to think like that about your podcast and other similar things that you're putting out there as well. Any kind of content that you've got. If it's paid and people are stealing it, let them steal it. With that said, sometimes it's easier to buy than steal. And sometimes it's the same price. If you're interested in the audiobook version of the book that I'm talking about, you can get it for free. You can get it for free via Audible. It comes with a trial. It's at bigpodcast.net. bigpodcast.net/audiobook. Get it, listen to it, share it with your friends. Just don't let it collect digital dust. Don't ignore it. This is helpful information if you've got a podcast. So get it however you can and take advantage of it. Next item, what your podcast can learn from free samples at Costco. I knew a guy, he actually just passed about 3 months ago. Good friend, a little older than me, known him all my life. And he was a guy that I would see him at Costco all the time. I'm a middle-aged white guy. We love Costco. And he especially loved it. He would go there for free samples. That's what he would do for his lunch. It was like a thing to him. This guy was so cheap. It was a game. He was trying to get in and get out with as little money spent as possible. Wasn't even going to spend 99 cents on a hot dog in there. He said, I'm going to go there. I'm going to get those samples. It's going to be my lunch. He went so frequently, he knew all the little old ladies who would give those samples out by name, and they knew him. Didn't matter what they were giving out. Black rice, granola, gummy bears, cookies, peanut butter brittle. He was going to eat it. And here's the irony. No joke. I think this guy probably spent $30,000 a year at Costco. Sometimes he was going to buy what was sampled. He did that a lot. But he was buying everything through Costco. He was getting prescription drugs, glasses, new computer, furniture. He got a car through Costco. This guy was spending a ton of money at Costco. Why? Because it had become part of his life. Look, I might have been in there, I don't know, every 3 weeks. I'd see him there all the time. And surely he was not there only when I was there. I'm in there maybe twice a month. He was there, always at lunch, always eating those samples. And every time spending a ton of money. That is the power of sampling. That is the power of getting people engaged with what you are doing, making yourself part of their lives. You got to trust it, just like that free content I'm talking about giving out. Give it out freely. But that's the flip side of that coin that I was just talking about. Don't give out everything, have a paid option. People will take advantage of it. Not everybody, but you don't need everybody when you got a guy like this. $30,000 a year, at least, probably more. And we're talking about probably 2 decades of going to Costco. I've known this guy for a long time. And once Costco hit Nashville, he was there. Before that, Sam's Club. He was at that game a long time. I got more information about that. All this stuff, again, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. That's where all the links are. I've got a pro podcast editor checklist. This is what's going to make your show better. If you want to go through your podcast and make it as smooth as a solid gold limousine on cloud tires, you're going to want this checklist. I mentioned a saying in the newsletter, and it's worth repeating here. Bodybuilders know that diet is important. You can't just get in the gym and work off your diet. They say abs are made in the kitchen. Podcasters have a similar thing. Great episodes are made via editing. You can have all this great content. You can have a great idea. You can have a great host. That'll get you a good episode. But what's going to take it to a great episode? That is the edit. And better shows get more listeners. That's what John Christensen says. He's right. He's got a pro podcast editor checklist. I've got it available to you free. You can download it right now. Newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Finally, in this issue, I've got 5 ways to convert your podcast into a powerful income stream. I'm really big on podcasts, obviously. That's why I'm doing a podcast specifically about podcasting. But I'm also big on newsletters. What I'm about to tell you is going to work for either one of those things. It's still content. It's still publishing. It still needs to be edited. It's still a smart move to give it away and then have some kind of upsell option. If you've got a podcast, it's pretty easy to turn it into a newsletter. That's what I'm doing. And with these episodes, I'm turning that newsletter into podcast. Here's what you can do with a podcast or a newsletter. And I've got more information about these at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Sell ad space, offering premium content for a fee, selling your product, selling your services. That's a great way to do it. And by having a podcast or a newsletter where you've made yourself a celebrity, very brand oriented in this country, you can do that for yourself. You can make more money with the exact same product or the exact same service that you wouldn't have been able to sell for as much money without the podcast or newsletter. Becoming an affiliate for the products and services of others, that's a quick and easy way to make some money from your podcast or your newsletter. If you're talking about something, throw in an affiliate link. You know this, but are you doing it? That's the question. This stuff isn't rocket science, but you got to think about this stuff, not just pass it over, and then you've got to do it. It takes a little bit more work. Not much, maybe a couple minutes, I don't know. But at the end of the year, that little bit of work is going to add up. Sponsorship from readers, you might call it Patreon, OnlyFans. You know, I got me an OnlyFans account. Patreon, no. OnlyFans is where it's at. OnlyFans.com/David Hooper if you want to find out about it. It's free. I'm not selling it. I'm just there because I want to find out how it works. There are people making $1 million a year on OnlyFans. Now, granted, they're selling something completely different than what I've got there. Like I said, I'm not selling anything. It's free. But I wanted to find out how it works because some of the people that I work with, they want to know that. So I jump in. I can better advise them because of it. It's podcasting advice. If you're curious about it, OnlyFans.com/David Hooper. I actually got a warning today from OnlyFans. They don't like me giving out my phone number on there. You know about my phone number? Subscribe to the podcast via phone, 615-488-4321. I put up a message on OnlyFans for a good time call, 615-488-4321. I thought I was being clever. OnlyFans didn't think it was funny. They said, you keep it up, we're going to knock you off of this. But I'm there for now, OnlyFans.com/David Hooper. All this stuff sounds pretty easy, and it sounds pretty obvious. But again, why haven't you done it yet? It's also easy not to do it. So just think about it. I've got stuff like this every single week in the newsletter, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. It comes out every Friday, delivered straight to your mailbox. It's got some good stuff for you. I'll save you money. Last week, I was talking about lifetime WordPress hosting. You use WordPress for your podcast? $99 for life. Pay once, never pay again. I got deals like that coming to me. I pass them on to you when they come up. $99 for life. You can see that right now. Newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Pay once, never have to worry about WordPress hosting again. Is it the best hosting? No, but it's as good as HostGator. It's as good as Bluehost. It'll get you where you need to go. Also, not a lot of money. This podcast, if you want to subscribe to it, it is free. Bigpodcast.com has it. And I got the newsletter, also free. Bigpodcast.com has that as well. I appreciate you listening to Build a Big Podcast. I will see you on the next episode. And if you go to bigpodcast.com and sign up for that newsletter, I will see you there as well. Thanks for listening to Build a Big Podcast. I'll see you on the next episode.